Welcome back, everybody. And this is Monica with Reboot Your Health Summit. And so we have another amazing guest today, and I am very excited to hear from him because he's going to be talking about weight loss and how to lose weight, not in a way that maybe you've heard from social media or another somebody who is telling you to stop eating or go on a diet. You're actually going to hear about how to go about it in your very unique way. So we're going to delve deeper into this subject. And if you don't know who Dr. Shay is, which I would be surprised, let me introduce him to you just a little bit. So Dr. Shay is a doctor of chiropractics, and he helps busy health-conscious moms, entrepreneurs, and mompreneurs attain and sustain high performance using personalized functional and genetic testing so that they can create more freedom for themselves and others. And Dr. Shay walked his own health journey from being chronically unwell from age 6 to 18, including severe fatigue, anxiety, digestive problems, chronic pain, severe insomnia, and poor nutrition. He dedicated his life to natural medicine to get himself and others well, which led him to functional medicine and functional testing. So we are going to delve into genetics and testing, I believe, as well, to actually help you, like I said again, help you actually understand your own unique profile. Why is that you may not be able to lose your weight? Why have you been struggling for so long? And what is that you need to know about your unique body and your genetics? So, Dr. Shay, welcome back. Let's delve in. And I am, of course, really appreciate you being here. And I cannot wait actually to hear all that content from you today. So, I do want to know, how did you get started in functional medicine, and especially why genetics?
Sure. Well, I got started in functional medicine the same way most of my colleagues get started, is that they went through a long, arduous journey of health concerns, whether it was their own physical health or one of a family member or a dear friend. In my case, it was my own health. And I was actually have a slideshow that actually goes over this. I think if you'd enable screen sharing, I think it could be help kind of explain the complexity of everything that how I arrived there. So what we're talking about today is like not all weight loss is the same, and dropping puffy weight, hormonal weight, and caloric weight, and how I got here to this genetics of weight loss really started when I was being raised by a really stressed out, unhealthy, and tired mompreneur. Now, just full disclosure that, my mom and I have a really great relationship now. In fact, she was just here as of this recording. We spent a week together. She came out to visit and it was really wonderful. And we earned that. It took a long time to get to that point of reconciliation where there's like deep friendship now. She's also a retired clinician, so we have really interesting conversations as well. And I basically had a lot of health problems, like a lot. And they were all kind of converged. And it was insomnia, went through a lot of violence in school. I was gaslit, was invalidated. I went through 2 addictions, a lot of joint pain because I thought spinal pain was normal until I got my first adjustment. Anxiety, depressed, really bad. And as a teenager, I decided to take control of my own health and really focus on what was at the time not the normative route, which was going into natural medicine, because Western medicine and pharmaceuticals weren't helping me with what I had going on. And I basically went through just all sorts of training. I mean, people ask me, what do you do? It's like, I'm a health mutt. I'm a combination of multiple things. So I went to chiropractic school. I did a holistic health practitioner degree when I was in college before I went to chiropractic school. When I lived in New Zealand for almost a decade, I did an acupuncture degree over there. I did functional neurology. I think got really heavy into functional testing and all sorts of other trainings as well, because what I realized was that there wasn't really any single one pathway that would help someone with a lot of complex issues like myself. And then the last piece, was getting really deep into genetics, and genetics solved so many of the issues that I've been struggling with, namely uh, getting on my absolute proper diet. I have been done dozens and dozens of different diets and just wasn't working. And then when I ran my genetics, which we'll cover a bit today, I realized that I was eating incongruently for my genetic. It wasn't a quality issue. It was a quantity of a particular macronutrient that I was overdoing, even though all the bell curve science says, well, everyone should eat this diet. Well, no, there's a bell curve, and some people over here on the bell curve and some people over here. And I happen to be over here, not in the middle of the bell curve where I was told I, quote, should be. So the good part about genetics testing is that you find out your individual needs, as opposed to just hoping by buying a book, listening to a podcast or summit, that whatever this person's diet they recommend, let's hope that works out this time, unlike all the other 24 other times it didn't work out. So when I got into genetics, for me, it was solving solved all sorts of digestive problems. It also solved chronic joint pain. Now, I mean, I had joint pain like I was in my 80s, but I was not even like barely in my 30s, and my what happened was that everyone expresses inflammation differently, and I'm going to talk about, of the three main ways people gain weight, inflammation is one of those. Now, I don't personally gain inflammatory weight. The inflammation, when I get inflamed, because I'm an overinflamer genetically, it goes into my joints, it goes onto my skin, it affects my mood, and it affects my sleep. So I have a different expression of inflammation. For a lot of people listening, their expression of dealing with an exaggerated inflammatory response, they put on massive amounts of water weight. And I'll go into the mechanisms why in a bit. And so people can have very strong pro-inflammatory genes, but they can express them in different ways. So one of the ways that clicking on the wrong, I'm clicking on the visual screen, not the actual presentation. It's moving. I don't understand. All right. Yes. So one of the things that people struggle with is yo-yo weight. So I call it the muffin test. So this is probably one of the best examples I've come up with. So undoubtedly, a lot of people have eaten half a muffin, and they put on 1 to 4 pounds, 1 to 3 pounds. Now, unless that muffin was last year's re-gifted Christmas fruitcake, it didn't weigh 1 to 3 pounds. Right? Yes. Okay. Now, what happened? Well, what happened was that the inflammatory components of that muffin, the sugars, the colorings, the preservatives, the flavorings, the dough conditioners, the glazes, any other things, any other chemicals, and the reactions to gluten, there's lots of different molecules in there that people could be reacting to. It creates it's an inflammatory response in the body. So what happens is that inflammatory chemicals damage cells, nerve cells, organs, tissues, fascia. They're damaging. So one of the ways that the body can deal with just this sudden rush of inflammatory chemicals is basically poisons. Is the solution to poison, the solution to toxic chemicals is dilution. So what happened is your body will now retain water, swell up, in order to dilute the inflammatory damaging chemicals to do what? Buy the liver and kidneys time to filter them out. What happens in a bee sting? A bee doesn't inject a half quart of water into your arm. That doesn't happen. What it does is it injects venom, to which the body reacts as, oh no, venom, quick, dilute it.
Yes.
Flood it with water so the venom doesn't corrode through your skin, muscle, bone, joints, blood vessels, and nerves to cause way more damage. So there's this swelling effect, which is a protective mechanism on the part of the body to stop corroding from damaging dangerous chemicals, in this case venom, but in the muffin's case, it could be, you pick any number of the ingredients I just mentioned prior. So now imagine, instead of a bee injecting your arm and it's the arm that swells up, you have this like systemic internal bee sting that's like this slow moving bee sting where your whole body is swelling up because it's now absorbing and digesting into the whole body. So you have this layer of water weight that your body retains. That's the puffy weight that I'm talking about. Puffy weight is the layer of water weight that doesn't go away based on how much you exercise, because it's not calories. That extra weight, that extra layer, that's not calories. That's water. And that's why you can have this losing muscle tone, like this quote washed out look, because water, literally a layer of water is washing out the muscle tone. And the weight can go up and down with your cycle. The weight can go up and you can feel swollen because as your liver has to deal with, say, hormones, and then it's got these competing narratives of dealing with hormones depending on what stage of your cycle, and inflammation, you can swell more because the liver is trying to detox both and it gets jammed. Then you have this other phenomenon that you can gain 1 to 3 pounds quickly and then lose them quickly with seemingly no rhyme or reason, because if you don't, like most people, like they can lose weight if they skip a meal, and that's not necessarily calories. Usually that's giving your body more time to drop the inflammatory load. That's what's happening, is you're dropping water weight, inflammatory water. And I'll give you a very stark example. Like my father, who has a weight problem, and unhealthy weight, is not, and again, for the people that need to hear this, this is not, I'm not here discussing aesthetics. And there's a movement right now that any talk of weight loss is somehow fat shaming. I'm not talking about people's aesthetics and their personal choice and what they view as beautiful. And you can go back to Victorian eras and other parts of the world through different times, and body shapes have different perceptions of what is beautiful over time in different contexts, etc. I'm talking about that from health standpoint. There is no argument to be made that being overweight is healthy. And if people conflate the two, I'm sorry, that's on you. Like I'm talking about health here. I'm not talking about aesthetics. I just want to put that up front.
Yes.
When I'm talking about my father's at an unhealthy weight, and I asked him to try doing an anti-inflammatory diet just for a day, because he would fidget eat on toasted cheese and gluten bread and just and I said, look, we're going to do an experiment. He's got 2 doctorates. You know, he understands experiments. He was a trained neuroscientist. And I said, we're going to do 1 day of experiment where you will have none of these inflammatory foods, but you will have the same number of calories through these other foods, which you like, but you just won't have these other inflammatory foods. You'll have the same number of calories. You'll eat the same amount, etc. The only thing that's changing is the type of food. And he agreed reluctantly. So he followed what I said. The very next morning, he got on the scale and was down 4 pounds. And it wasn't from eating, from not having, from fasting and not having, calories, because he had calories. I know, because I watched him. What dropped was the inflammatory water weight. That he wasn't eating the things that was trigger this water weight retention from eating pro-inflammatory foods. So the other phenomenon that people should look for is, do you get fatter the more you exercise?
Okay, well, let me just backtrack for 1 second. So what you're saying, the first kind of weight gain or not being able to lose weight is when we are chronically inflamed.
Yeah, inflammatory water weight.
Okay,
That's
so we have to look, and we're not looking necessarily at just the weight. We have to look at underlying health conditions that are creating that, and with all hosts of things like toxic food that we're consuming, right?
mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So just wanted to have that first kind. Okay.
Hormonal toxic weight, they can sound similar, but they're actually slightly different. So
Okay.
hormonal toxic weight is where people are exposed to toxic chemicals, which can also create an inflammatory response. But if they can't be cleared through the liver and kidneys through the water dilution to by time method, then these toxic chemicals are stored in the fat cells.
Okay.
And that's a different mechanism to get rid of them. If they've been,
Okay.
instead of being shoved, gotten rid of through the normal, egress points of kidneys and liver dumps into the bowels to be pooped out via via the bile into the small intestine to be pooped out through the large intestine.
Mhm,
The
mhm.
kidneys obviously through the urine. If you can't get rid of it that way and it circulates enough, and the body's like, okay, we just can't get rid of it, so we got to put it in the dirty closets, which in this case are the fat cells. So
Okay. So it's almost like we have different ways of getting rid of toxins, and depending of what kind of way our body is designed to
the
use,
genetics, yeah.
that's
What's
the
a potential?
genetics,
Yeah.
we will be gaining weight in a different way, right?
Correct. We'd be filling the fat cells with toxic chemicals and heavy metals and whatever. That's hormonal toxic weight. And then the caloric fat weight, that's the weight most people think is weight, which is not true in my experience. Most of the weight I see anyway that people have is majority is inflammatory water weight, secondarily is hormonal toxic, and lastly is caloric fat weight.
Mhm.
So this is what people think of when they think of, oh, I'm overweight. It's like, well, you may be just you may be over retaining water, over inflamed and overly toxic. So those are the three types, and the most common is the inflammatory, which is why I linger on it a bit more. And there's other ways to know if you are more, just signs that you are likely to be more of a genetically inflammatory weight gainer, is that the more you exercise, the fatter you get, or you just stay at this washed out level and you never lose this layer of water weight on top of your muscles. And what happens is that appropriate exercise on balance is anti-inflammatory. But if you do too much, then it tips into pro-inflammatory. And now it's like, instead of you're eating a muffin, you're over exercising. So these are the people that a lot of people who like run every day, or these CrossFit super enthusiasts, or just some people genetically, they have a lower threshold of exercise tolerance, that if they over exercise, they suddenly become pro-inflammatory. And this happened to my best friend in chiropractic school, who I told her for literally years, you are over exercising. The weight you're trying to lose is not caloric weight. You exercise literally every day and your diet is like near perfect. There's clearly something else going on. Let your nerdy friend help you. And she refused till finally she allowed me to do her genetics. And sure enough, she was a over-inflamer genetically. And I asked her, have you ever had a moment or a period of time where you couldn't exercise, like through no fault of your own? You just couldn't do it. And then you went back like a week later and your body looked better and you were stronger. And she
Yes.
got really quiet on the phone, and it was super awkward for her. And I let her marinate in that little awkwardness, because this was the real message she needed to get. She quietly admitted that that summer she was traveling. The gym was closed in the hotel. There was middle of nowhere. So she couldn't exercise for a week. She came back to the gym literally when she got home, and she looked better and she was able to lift more
Mhm.
because she gave her body a break from being so inflamed from over exercising. I'm not
Okay.
saying exercise is bad. I'm not saying that. I'm saying over exercising is bad, and everyone's threshold is different.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate that, because this is actually answering the question why all this dogma that eat less, exercise more is really not working for most of the people,
For most of
right?
the people that are so let me clarify. Most
Mhm.
of the people who are not losing weight by that method. So
Mhm.
so that there's a lot of people do overeat and do need to stop their caloric intake, and by exercise more. Well, if someone's a couch potato, exercise more means anything, which is a good thing. So it's what's demographic you're looking at, that exercise more and eat less is actually counterproductive. It's a specific and large demographic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Now, this is very important, because, a lot of questions we get is, I am active, I exercise 7 days a week. I try not to eat junk food or sugar, but I'm still not losing weight. I have
There
those
you go.
love handles, right?
Yeah.
hmm So
Yeah,
this describes this describes somebody who is overly inflamed.
very likely. Like there's some more obscure reasons why, like not merely obscure, but just things we don't have time to discuss on this particular call. Like if they have thyroid
Mhm.
issues, like if there could be other metabolic issues outside of genetics testing that may have to be checked as well. There could be some thyroid issues as well, but if there's someone is if someone is struggling, then genetics has to be a part of that analysis to see, like, are they over inflaming. And
Oh,
if they're over exercising and they're not losing weight, there's something that's blocking them. And it's either they're over exercising for too much inflammation, or it could be other issues, like they may have a genuine thyroid issue as well. But I'm assuming thyroid is very easy to get checked, so I'm assuming this person may have already had their thyroid checked as well. But genetics is the thing most people are missing.
okay, great. So, and how, quick question, or not quick, but I do want to bring that a little bit more into the conversation. So, what happens with the hormonal balance or imbalance, and how does that play into the picture if we're talking about genetics and we're talking about weight loss?
When you say hormonal balance, you're talking about hormonal
Or
weight gain?
yeah, well, sex hormones mostly, right? Because especially when we're going through transitions, say somebody entering menopause. So, how does that play into that picture of the three different
Sure.
types of
So
weight?
if someone's going to menopause, the ovaries are shutting. If their ovaries are shutting down, and so a huge number of the sex hormones is now no longer available to be produced. And so what can happen is that now the sex hormones are made mostly in the ovaries, but also in the adrenal glands. And so when the ovaries shut down, now it's all up to the adrenal glands. And we in the West, a lot of women suffer from modern woman syndrome, which is what my colleague Dr. Bourbon coined. Modern woman syndrome. It's like you've been stressing out trying to be super mom your whole life, and then your adrenals are stressed, trying to deal with regulating mineral balance, regulating adrenaline, regulating cortisol, which controls inflammation and blood sugar, and then also sex, and like up to 40% of sex hormones, at least according to Dr. Wilson, who I studied with on adrenals. So now the ovaries are no longer operational. So now the adrenal glands have extra work to now deal with sex hormone balance, and so they're now struggling to deal with that, add that extra load, but they also got this other obligation of cortisol to deal with inflammation. So now it's got to deal with the same amount of inflammation, but now more stress on how to manage the sex hormones. And so then the inflammation pathway is now struggling. And if you're already genetically prone to overinflammation, that amount of cortisol that you had available is now maybe dropping because your adrenal glands are now stressed out over what do I do? Because now I've got this other job that someone just retired, and now I got to do all their work. Uh,
Yeah.
so that's one mechanism that the genetics and menopause kind of intersect.
Okay, great. So, well, we need to delve into the question, how do we know which type we are, and how do we go about genetics, and especially, how is your genetics approach different from
Sure.
other approaches?
So to answer that, let me explain a bit more about the significance of genetics and how we get there. So just so that people understand the significance of weight and genetics, this is a study out of Australia in 2009 that said 70% of genetics is the thing that determines 70% of weight is determined by genetics. The other 30% is the environment and lifestyle that triggers said genetics. Like, again, like when I get inflamed, my expression is not weight. My expression is pain and insomnia, skin rashes, irritability. That's how my genes interpret inflammation. For other people, it's weight. It's that water retention. So genetics is super significant for people to understand their weight. Little bit of disclaimers. This is in my free ebook that people can get if they want the written version. I have this ebook is available for free on my website, drsamshay.com/genetics. And at the
Great.
time of this recording, I'm still doing free 15-minute consults to determine if people are qualified to go through this involved genetics approach with me, and that link is available there as well, also on my website. Um, when people, we talk about genetics, the first thing to understand is what are genetics. And so the analogy, the best analogy I've come across is about a library. So, and it took me a while to find a picture of a library with a spiral staircase, like the spiral helix. So in the cell is a city. In the city is a library. The library is the nucleus, and that library has walls. That's like extra protected. And the genes are organized into chromosomes or shelves. And the chromosomes have bands of DNA that contain genes. These are the books on the shelves. And the genes are the recipes to make proteins. And you open a book and lay it flat. Here's the recipe to make the gene. You got one copy from mom of the recipe, one copy from dad on that recipe. So library is the nucleus, the shelves are the chromosomes, the books are the bands that have the bands on the chromosome. You open the book is the gene. So mom and dad donate half of their genes, and so you could have the normal or quote wild type, a normal type, or you can have the variant or like the bad gene, air quotes bad gene. And through sexual through sexual selection, there's a mixture, and so you can have two good copies, which is a so-called green dot, two bad copies, a so-called red dot, and a mixture of one quote good copy, one quote bad copy, which is colloquially called a yellow dot. And I know I'm being very simplistic. I know people, there's a lot of training in genetics will be like, well, don't say it's good or bad, but we're not in a genetics conference right now. We're just talking about an overview.
Weight loss.
So,
Yes.
Weight loss, yeah. So when there's a I call it a traffic light system. I mean, it's called a traffic light system, but I kind of nuance it a little bit. And so if someone is quote doomed to a red dot or a yellow dot, does that mean they're doomed? The answer is no. The answer is that we have something called epigenetics, which is how lifestyle and diet influence genetic expression. So it's where you are at the starting line. So I made this graphic of a traffic light, and you see how the beam of light of the red, it can go into green territory, and the green light can go into red territory. So if someone starts at green but does a really bad lifestyle, they can careen into red light expression. Reds, people born with a red, they can do really great lifestyle. Wonderful, fantastic. They will never have that gene become a permanent green. That does not happen unless you're dumb enough to inject CRISPR into your bicep, which has happened. Go on the internet, type in CRISPR bicep muscle gain, and you'll see some really freaky photos. You watch it, just don't do it. Yeah. But the red can behave like a green dot. It can behave like a green dot. The yellow can behave like a green dot with the right with the right lifestyle intervention. Now, I just also want to state that the relationship to a yellow, the traffic light system, green, yellow, red, is great, but it's the problem of understanding, is the yellow dot. So what you think the yellow dot is based on what country you come from and your relationship to authority. And what I mean by that is that I'll give you an example. In the Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe, they, on balance, really trust their government. I'm not getting into political discussion here. I'm just saying that's just, in general, Scandinavian countries trust their government compared to, say, Italy.
Yes.
Which doesn't. So if you are in a country where the culture is you trust the authorities, a yellow dot at a traffic, you're driving a car, you see it's a yellow light, that means it's a red. You press the brakes and you wait patiently in red and all the rest of it. However, if you're in Italy and you see a yellow dot, that's a hard green. You go right through it. So your relationship to authority determines what you think the yellow means to you. And yellow in this genetic case, yellow is, we are going to be Scandinavian in our sensitivities and sensibilities. That yellow means it's a slightly less version of a red, not a slightly less benign version of a green. That yellows are not good and the reds are even worse. So we treat yellows like reds in this case. They're just slightly worse versions of them. So when we look at the paradigm of genetics, we have, when we look at paradigm of healthcare, we have the traditional model versus the aligned health model. So this is what I operate in as functional medicine, which is the best of Western medicine's diagnostics, but the best of natural medicine's lifestyle interventions. So we have all the fun diagnostic toys of Western medicine, but we use natural methods, diet, lifestyle, nutrition,
Yeah.
etc.
Hmm.
To we take the data from over here, but we use the tools from over there
Yes.
to get the best of both worlds. And then
Mhm.
genetics, we have the similar issue. We have Western genetics that's looking for individual genes, where in functional genetics, we're looking at clusters of genes. They're Western genetics looking for pathology. We're looking for
Mhm.
function. It's like black and white. Oh, you have the bad gene or the good gene versus like, well, we've got epigenetics to help you navigate whatever
Yes.
fault lines you've got in your genetic code, et cetera, et cetera. So the
I just want to say this is very important because you may be thinking, we're trained, unfortunately, by traditional medicine or Western, conventional medicine is that, okay, if you have that bad gene, that you're doomed. But this is absolutely not true. And this is why we even having all those conversations.
Yeah. So in some cases, like in certain very rare cases, the gene you are doomed. But that's so rare, but that's been
Mhm.
selected out the vast majority of time, so we don't really
Mhm.
see that much because we wouldn't have survived with that. So what we're looking at is the giant gray space in between, where people can have quote bad genes, but we can have good lifestyle to make up for those bad genes.
Mhm.
And it's a very empowering, hopeful and optimistic message as opposed to
Yes.
disempowering. Now, to go to your question of like how are some of these gene tests different? It's like, well, a lot of people have heard of 23andMe and Ancestry.com, and it's a dubious promise that you'll have all the information you need and you'll be given this lovely list of lifestyle, nutrition, exercise. You just put it through an app or you go see something or whatever, and all be easy and simple and so forth. And it's not. And what happens is that when people do these like these larger commercial tests and run it through an app or whatever, they get overwhelmed. There's no prioritization. There's no help implementing. It's very alarmist, and you're treated like an algorithm, not a person. Additionally, there's problems with how do you prioritize the genes. Not all red dots are the same in terms of their influence. Some genes are more important in regards to health than others. So there has to be a criteria. So the genetic system that I use, every gene that's selected goes through 4 specific criteria. One is you look at the genes that influence the main drivers of all diseases. So the main drivers are inflammation, cell defense, like liver detox and free radical damage control in the mitochondria, your ability to use vitamin D, methylation, cardiovascular circulation, and fat metabolism. So those are the drivers, meaning that we're looking at what are the drivers of all disease, and if these things are provoked, then they will poke on the quote unquote disease genes. I'm not looking for the Alzheimer's gene, the stroke gene, the heart disease gene, the obesity gene. I'm not looking for all of these different specific quote
Mhm.
unquote disease genes. I'm looking for the drivers of all diseases that then,
Mhm.
when provoked, will poke on these quote unquote disease genes. So
Yes.
what
So
that
like the disease is the symptom of an underlying condition
it's
or
downstream.
proclivity
Yeah.
of the body. Hmm.
Yeah, it's downstream. So like I'm not treating diseases with my genetics analysis. I'm looking at the drivers of diseases. And
Hmm.
then you've got to look at if so when you find so there's about 30,000 genes. So if you look at just the genes that control the drivers of diseases, you eliminate thousands and thousands of genes off the table. Then you look at the genes that are upstream. So there's hundreds of genes that influence inflammation. I would want to look at the top 15, that control the hundreds underneath it. So I want to look at those genes. Then I want to find of those I want to look at the ones that are really upstream. I want to look at which ones have very common variations in the normal population. At least 10% of the population has a possible variant. Now, one question people may ask is like, well, why do we have inflammation in the first place? Like, this is all like, why if evolution's so intelligent, like why do people have varying degrees of inflammation? And I probably should have mentioned this up front.
We need it.
Well, we do, and in certain as hunter gatherers, Like if I'm out hunting and I'm going after a large animal with a tiny stick, it's very likely me or some member of my hunting party is going to get bit, gored, trampled, or clawed in process. And where if I get a slash wound or I'm bitten, that's a rendering of tissue, that's damaging tissue, plus it's injecting bacteria from like the saliva or the dirt or whatever. So what inflammation does is it rushes in. So it's like a version of the bee sting, right? It rushes in, rushes all this extra blood to clean up the damage, and rushes in white blood cells to kill any pathogens that were injected in through the skin. So it's a way to deal with damage. Now, if you have if you are a very exuberant inflamer, that means that you could take more damage. You could heal from the damage quickly. Obviously, if there's too much inflammation, you'll choke off arteries, and so there's like this dance here. But if I have the same bite wound as one of my hunting parties, and I have more exuberant inflammatory capacity, I will kill the infection and clear up the wound faster than my hunting buddy. So higher inflammation has an evolutionary advantage in certain circumstances. So I will likely survive more the short term, but my buddy will survive more long term if he doesn't get, gored in the process or whatever, because he'll have less inflammatory based chronic diseases. Whereas I will survive more in the short term, but will have a higher risk of long-term inflammatory based issues. So what's happening now in modern day is that there's so much less physical trauma relative to hunter-gatherer times that there's a mismatch between my inflammatory capacity and my environment around me. So people now who have a very high genetic capacity for inflammation, they're not at the same advantage. They didn't have the same advantages they did in a hunter-gatherer time frame. So that's why people can have all these like, I don't understand, I have all these bad inflammatory genes. They're not bad, they're just maladaptive for the current environment that they're in. Mm-hmm. So we want to find these genes that have, a lot of people have variations. We're not hunting for some super obscure gene like that's 0.001% of the population. And then the last criteria for picking a gene is which genes have had peer-reviewed research done in humans, not wombats or nematodes, yes, to show that lifestyle, exercise, diet, nutrition alone can change the epigenetic expression for the better, to make it behave more green-like. So when you put all these genes through all this criteria, you're left with like maybe 100 or so genes, not the hundreds that 23andMe and Ancestry like throw at you with no sense of priority or organization. So yes, that's what you want in your genetics test. That's why the genetics tests that I look at are not the same as 23andMe or Ancestry. Additionally, there's certain tests that can't be done by Ancestry and 23andMe because there's certain tests that look at different types of genetic analysis. It's not just a variant analysis, but it's looking at the number of duplicates of a gene, which we'll get to in a bit later. But there's certain types of analysis that's more than just green, yellow, red dot. There's a three-dimensionality of genetics very few people know about or much less talk about, and that's called copy number analysis. That's the number of duplicates of a gene, not the variation of the gene. Yeah, we'll cover that in a bit later. So then the other.
So a quick question, because somebody may be listening, is like, well, maybe I can just figure out my own body myself. Like I do seem to be the over-inflamer, and I do seem to gather my, water in my body. And that seems like, yeah, I match that profile. So what would be, can we just do it ourselves? Do we need that deeper genetic testing?
Go for it and see how it works. Like there's plenty of things out there that are quote anti-inflammatory. The difference is how specific to you do you want your protocol and recommendations to be. You now have more information, but it's not any different than like, oh, I'm tired, therefore I think, oh, it may be Lyme, maybe, oh, it may be mold, maybe, oh, it may be metals, and you may just go on this journey and just go through countless other iterations, this time with an anti-inflammatory umbrella. And it might help to a point. It might, really. And there's the thing about doing genetics, proper genetics, is that you are really specific and granular to your specific needs. So you can bypass, months, even years of wasted time and especially save yourself tons of money and effort because you're actually investing in testing to just speed the whole process up.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So the other thing that we're looking for with genetics analysis is groupings. So ignore like the designations and hexadecimal stuff on the specific genes on the left here. Just look at the circles and you'll see this is about cardiovascular health. So this person has a lot of green dots and one yellow. This person has a lot of red and yellow dots and one green. Now, without knowing anything about genetics, which person are you concerned about with their cardiovascular health?
Well, the red one.
Correct. Absolutely. Because we're looking at clusters, not individual genes. So if I made the mistake of just fixating on this one yellow dot and to the not seeing, I would say, oh my God, this person's in danger of all this blood pressure stuff. No, they're really not when you take in the whole picture. Whereas if I just fixate on the green dot over here of the person who's covered in reds and yellows, we're like, oh, this person's great. It'll be fine. No, you've got to look at the clustering. And to bring it to inflammation, these are the 15 major genes for inflammation. And this is an actual client of mine. And what she had was she has these clusterings of, she has problems over-inflaming, over-sustaining, and under-clearing inflammation. So she can spark inflammation quickly. She can over-propagate inflammation, like it keeps going, and she has trouble clearing it. So when, and in her particular case, what happened was that she got a new physical trainer without telling me, who happened to be a CrossFit enthusiast who had her over exercise. Okay. And so she had not only 40-year-old female started an intense exercise program to lose weight. Instead, she gained weight and her cycles went off. Okay. So she contacted me really stressed out. What's going on? And I said, well, let's have a look at your genetics and stop doing the over exercising. And sure enough, I found this pro-inflammatory pattern plus her liver pattern. She had a hard time detoxing estrogen. So, and these three genes, the CRP genes, these are all the acute phase inflammatory gene expression in the liver. So she got overinflamed from too much exercise, and her liver was easily clogged with inflammation. Plus, she had difficulty with liver detox anyway of estrogen. So what happened is that not only she put on water weight, but her cycles went wonky because she couldn't properly regulate her hormones as they would go through their normal cycles because her liver was overwhelmed. And so for women, they can put on weight and their cycles go off. For men who have this pro-inflammatory pattern, including like not able to detox estrogen properly, they don't have cycles to go off, but they can develop man boobs. And I actually lectured at a genetics conference on exercise-induced weight gain and man boobs. Now, I don't have some weird fixation on man boobs. I'm just an observant clinician. And I noticed these two gentlemen were overweight. They exercised a lot, yet the more they exercised, the fatter they got. And they were more joint pain, and they both got man boobs. And I was like, okay, I think they're overinflaming through lifestyle, and they can't get rid of their estrogens. So the weight is being redistributed to their chest. And sure enough, you look at their genetics, that's what happened. And so with her, pulled her off the super crazy exercise schedule, put her on the proper diet and lifestyle based on her genetics, and her muscle tone came back and her cycles normalized. And the gentlemen who had this overweight they were doing the eat less, exercise more protocol. That's what they were doing before they came to see me. Completely changed it to anti-inflammatory, liver supporting, all things forming their genetics. One guy lost 40 pounds in 1 month. The other guy lost 2 pounds a week for, it was either 14 weeks or 16 weeks straight. I can't remember. But they just lost so much of this inflammatory weight, and including off their chest, because we were doing things appropriate for their genetics. So one other thing that I wanted to point out is how inflammation can trigger belly fat. And this is a schematic of inflammation affecting estrogen-dosed fat. So if there's estrogen is saturating fat cells, it can create belly fat, which then increases inflammation, which then, because fat can also produce estrogen, which then creates this vicious cycle.
Okay.
So you can create this vicious cycle of belly fat when you have excess estrogen. And what happens is, so how do you address that? One is you remove the external or exogenous sources of estrogen. You support the liver, drop inflammation, change your lifestyle to kind of cut the inflammatory estrogen spiral from happening. So so when we do a genetics analysis, what do we do? Because we don't want to give, like, if there's 100 genes, we don't want to give 100 lifestyle recommendations. That's really not practical. It's overwhelming. That's what happens on a 23andMe and Ancestry analysis. It's overwhelming. It's impractical. So what we do is we find the fewest number of lifestyle changes that affect the most number of important genes. So I want to find not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 separate lifestyle changes. I want to find the handful of lifestyle changes that affect all or most of these genes all at the same time. So I can implement very few lifestyle changes to have a disproportionately beneficial effect on these red and yellow genes. And so this is what was for that female client of mine. This is not, someone should not just copy this for themselves. This is specific to her, that there was a specific number of red and yellow dots, and based on the number of genes affecting the specific red and yellow dots to her, there was 14 genes that were affected by this one intervention, and then this 14 by this other, 11 by superoxide dismutase inducers, and all this other nerdy stuff. So there's a way to rank order lifestyle changes based on the number of papers based on the number of genes that have a peer-reviewed research paper done in humans, like this criteria. So if I've got a paper that shows a single intervention done on humans affects all of these genes at the same time, I'm going to do that intervention first. That's the long and the short of it. And so you can actually rank order your lifestyle interventions based on the number of genes that have a paper behind it on peer-reviewed research done on humans. And I'm sorry to like harp on that particular fact of like,
yeah,
but it's so important because a lot of these recommendations that people get based on their genes are done on like mouse, nematode, and like fruit fly studies. They're not done on humans.
Yes. Do you find that there actually is enough of that research? As I would imagine that probably not.
No, there's plenty. It's growing every day. The amount of genetics research is exploding. Like it is
great
exploding. Like the knowledge, it's crazy making just how much new information is coming out. I think the knowledge is literally doubling every 2 years.
Okay.
Like it is hockey sticking, and statistically, like it is going up. So the Achieve Your Natural Weight profile, like this, when you drop, this is the main profile that I use to determine, are you a inflammatory weight gainer, a caloric fat gainer, or a hormonal toxic weight gainer. And it's one of 6 converging genetics profiles that I do that synergize with each other because they all answer different questions. The Achieve Your Natural Weight profile, what it does is it identifies the key lifestyle changes to diet, nutrients, and other lifestyle changes. I also call it the stop the clock of the effects of aging because that's the profile that checks the 60-odd genes, these key ones that affect the 7 drivers of all diseases. It's also what I can call the longevity, health, and well-being profile. It's also what I call the future-proof your brain profile. Now, my father is going through dementia right now, and he's never future-proofed his brain. You know, he just didn't do it. He refused to do what he needed to do based on his genetics. I mean, he had that one day, and then he was like, "Oh, that's fun," and then he went right back to fidget eating, gluten, dairy, which was totally bad for him. So the natural weight, learning what type of weight loss you are can set you up for the future for all sorts of things. And it's not just about weight loss. People may be listening to this and go, well, I'm not concerned about weight. Great. Then don't be. Then be concerned about all the drivers of all diseases from the inherited genetic fault lines that you got. Like for me, I'm not concerned about weight. I've never been concerned about weight personally, but I've been concerned about all sorts of other problems with inflammation, not just in my joints, my sleep, my mood, my skin, but I've got some really funky inherited disease risks from my family, neurodegeneration, cardiovascular, you name it, that I absolutely want to future proof by knowing my genetics. Is not, this test is not just about for people who are concerned with weight. The other thing about weight is identifying your ideal diet. So ideal diet, this is, are you genetically best suited for keto, Mediterranean, paleo, or high carb? That you can genetically determine this now. This is possible. This is a huge game changer for me. So
Yeah.
just to give it, this is not about variant analysis. This is not about looking at, are you a green, yellow, or red dot? This is looking at the number of duplicates of a particular gene that breaks down carbohydrates. So imagine cannons lining a fort. So if you have one cannon, you only spit out so many cannonballs of enzyme. But if you have 9 cannons, they all fire. Like, you get the signal there's a carb, it's an all or nothing. So if I've got one cannon, all I got is that one cannon firing the enzyme to break down carbs. If I've got like 9 or 20, then all 9 or 20 fire. So the person with a higher number of duplicates breaks down carbs way more easily. So like a 2 versus a 9 is really different. So people that are lower carb tolerance have lower copies or lower copy numbers. People with higher numbers have a higher tolerance. So for me, I was eating, before I did this test, the perfect Portlandia organic farmers market diet. I knew the names of my farmers, their chickens. Like, I
Yes.
had sprouted quinoa raised by monks, but sung on the full moon, whatever. Like, it's just, I had the perfect diet, and I was still having these energy crashes, and I was gassy and bloated, and I felt it was just awful. Even though I was eating a quality diet, when I did my genetics, I realized I was eating the wrong quantity of carbs. It wasn't a quality issue, it was a quantity issue. So when I reduced my carbs to my genetic set point, my digestive problems for nearly 20 years, or some actually more than 20, we'll call it 20 years, went away 1 week, because I had changed my diet to match my genetic capacity for carbs.
That is so, I just want to say this is so important because we have so many questions. I eat that perfect diet.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep clean. I don't, eat sugar. And yet I'm still struggling with either pain or being overweight.
Yeah.
So you
Or fatigue
explained
or
that.
gas or anything else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Great.
it goes in the other direction as well. So I have one client who got on keto, and he was like fainting and
Yeah.
like super unwell, and he was basically keto shamed by his friends who were like, "Oh my god, keto is amazing. You should totally do it." And he's a big dude. He's like a big tennis player. Like, he's a big dude. And I was talking with him, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm like, my friend, like," and I just got his results in, and I hadn't told him his results in, and he was talking, and he's like, "Yeah, God, I just try to go keto, and like, it was just so awful." And I interrupted and says, "Under no circumstances are you to go keto based on your genetics. Under no circumstances." Because he was an 11. He was an 11. I'm borderline hate keto with being a 2. And it's like, under no circumstances you to be keto, because you does not match your genetics whatsoever. And he was like, I knew it. Like, he just, like, because this is the same thing that people run up against. It's like, people try a magic diet and it works amazingly for someone, and then you try and it doesn't work so well, and then you get like shamed, or like, "Oh, I'm broken somehow," or "It doesn't work for me." And
Yeah.
like, those diets do work, but just for the right people that they're designed to work for,
Yes,
not for
that's the
everybody.
key.
Yeah.
That's the key, really. I mean, we cannot stop repeating that because, there's just too much of that when somebody is actually, they started being on keto or on being vegetarian and it worked perfectly for them. And now they are telling us we all have to go start doing that. And it's absolutely not true.
Yeah. Absolutely. So this is a way to determine if you're keto, Mediterranean, paleo, or high carb. And then there's trigger foods, which is another aspect to understanding the genetics of optimal diet. So in terms of weight, if you're eating foods that affect you, then trigger inflammation or water retention. There's other things on genetics tests check for on trigger foods, like histamine intolerance. So some people, like the bee sting, some people are more sensitive to being blown up by histamine than others. Other people like not so much, and it's a trade-off. Like, so in hunter-gatherer times, if you're really sensitive to histamine and you get a bee sting, then you're going to rapidly put on water to dilute the venom, which is good, unless the swelling is so much you choke up arterial or nerve flow, and you create, like, your hand goes blue from all the swelling. And if you have a really low response to histamine and you get injected with venom, then you're not going to get obstruction of your arterial or nerve flow, but you may get damaged by the venom. So it's this trade-off. It's like inflammation response, you know?
Yes.
So trigger foods are really, really important. Some people like me find out that I have caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. So caffeine, whether it's in dark tea or it's in coffee, really messes with my mood. Now, when I lecture to a group of entrepreneurs and I say, some of you are at risk of caffeine-induced anxiety and depression, you can hear the collective sphincter go like this, because they're terrified of not being able to use caffeine. So, yeah. So it's really important to know that, because some people's mood issues are caffeine issues. Like, and there's so many things in the trigger foods. There's 7 major things in the trigger food analysis: your relationship to coffee, alcohol, lactose, gluten, salt, histamines, and other food allergens. Now, salt's interesting. Salt is like at risk of raising blood pressure, but for other people with that gene, the variant, the red dot in the genes, they don't get high blood pressure, but they actually swell. They actually retain water through water from excess salt. So that's another mechanism through water weight, is if your sensitivity to salt, and you should know that genetically. The next thing is rewiring eating behaviors. Now, for some people, they overeat not from lack of willpower, but because they're genetically vulnerable to overeating, or they're genetically vulnerable to over-consuming sugar, or their fat response, or whatever it might be. So when people are red dots in feeling that the feeling full is not in the stomach, it's in the brain. There's a signaling system from stomach to brain to tell you that you're full. So if people have a red or yellow dot, there's a delay in that system, for example. So feeling full may have to be about implementing other strategies if you have this genetic variant. It's not a willpower thing. It may be a brain delay thing. Also, if some people are super tasters for bitter, that they will avoid healthy green vegetables because it's too bitter. And so they'll just not eat. Like, I saw one estimate. I don't know. I wish I had the citation. I can't find it. I'm really bummed. I had it and then I lost it. That they can like not eat like 100 to 200 pounds of vegetable, like they just not eat 100 pounds of vegetables in a year compared to other people because of the bitter flavor.
Yeah.
So if you are a super taster for bitter and you just can't tolerate the taste of bitter, and if you genetically know that, then you can change your culinary environment to cook in a different way to then eat those healthy bitter vegetables.
Yeah. Right. Yes, that's amazing. And and also it's important because a lot of people ask about being either addicted to certain foods or just not being able to bring themselves to eat certain healthy foods.
Yes.
Is there a link to food addiction, so-called?
Yes. So there's a couple of things around addiction. So a couple of things that I've identified in the profile. So there's people who are sweet likers and people who are sweet dislikers. Now, you may know the sweet likers. If you have the sweet liker gene plus the overconsumption of sugar gene, and then those are 2 of the genes that are tested in this, then you are a very high risk of overeating sugar, super high risk. Now, for the sweet dislikers, they're not off the hook, because if you have the combination of you dislike the taste of sweet, like you, sorry, hold on, let me change that. Let me rephrase. So if people who really who really like the taste of sweet, and they like the taste of bitter, and they metabolize alcohol out their system quickly, meaning that they're able to metabolize alcohol, then they really like the flavor of alcohol a lot because they can't taste how sickeningly sweet and bitter it is. And they can drink tons of it. So they're at high risk of alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
So people who have variations in alcohol where they can't metabolize it, they get their face gets flushed, they feel really ill. They don't really become alcoholics because alcohol just makes them ill. So people who can have a strong way to metabolize alcohol, they're at a higher risk of alcoholism because they can. So it may sound counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
that's real.
No, and it's so important because, we get shamed so much. Like, stop eating sugar. What is your problem? Or, just stop with that wine every, for your dinner because it is bad for you. And yet still there are people who just having such a hard time to resist that. And
Yeah.
so we are actually, taking that shaming off and really looking into science.
Yeah. So if people are struggling with over-consuming something, they may have a genetic predisposition to over-consuming it. And there's also other things to look at. So are people emotionally eating? I mean, I overcame 2 addictions, and I was definitely using food as one of them to numb out. There are also people may have an underlying metabolic disorder where their body is. We see pregnant women that are eating dirt because they're so starved for minerals. Like sometimes it's a physiological need, but we're being tricked because sweet fruit in hunter-gatherer times, the trees waited until the deal with ripe fruit, bright fruit was the tree says, okay, we are going to give you, the animal who's going to eat this thing, lots of sugar and lots of vitamins and minerals in exchange for taking our seeds
And spreading
putting
them.
through the digestive tract, walking away from the mother tree, and pooping out those seeds with a bunch of fertilizer to grow another tree. That's the deal. So ripe fruit was the signal to animals, hey, we've got your sugar and nutrients here, come and get it. But if the fruit wasn't ripe yet, it was bitter. So the animals wouldn't eat it. So the bitterness was a signal, and the lack of color change was a signal to, we're not ready yet. You don't want to eat us yet because we're still putting all the nutrition into it, and not only into the fruit flesh, but also to the seeds, so that they have enough seed, material in them to actually grow into something. So the problem is that sweet foods in hunter-gatherer times always came with associated minerals and nutrients because of ripe fruit. But today we're just eating the sugar with none of the nutrients.
Yes.
So people can be eating sugar, but evolutionarily their body is craving sugar, not because they're craving sugar, because they're craving the minerals and nutrients that were in the sugar-laced foods in hunter-gatherer times. And that's the mismatch. So they could be of underlying metabolic disorder, or they can have an underlying gut infection that could be eating their calories on their behalf. So they're eating because they have other infections that are eating calories and nutrients on their behalf. So there are other things that can influence aside from just, emotionally eating. And there's many ways to address that. This is obviously a much longer, bigger conversation. I've given whole summit interviews just on emotional eating. As you know, like it's a huge topic.
Yes.
So the genetics is a huge layer to help people understand what is going on, and there's very practical things that people can do. And I just there's only a couple slides left to go through on covering just the other aspects of weight gain. And there's the vitamin D utilization. So vitamin D is one of the most important genes out there. Vitamin D receptors are the most important genes out there, probably for controlling inflammation. Vitamin D is estimated to control or influence 3 to 5% of the human genome, that one molecule. And getting vitamin D from the sun is only half the journey. Getting it from the sun into the blood is half the journey. But vitamin D in the blood getting into the cells is the other half of the journey.
Oh, interesting.
So people can get vitamin D into their blood from sunlight, which has about a half dozen or so major genes between sunlight and your blood. So people have variations on that. It can be hard for them to get sunlight to their blood. Then you can also get it from food and from supplements. But then getting it from the bloodstream into the cells is a completely different phenomenon. That's the vitamin D receptors. These are the docking sites that grab the vitamin D and bring it into the cells.
Mhm.
And very, very few things actually can change the receptor populations if you're a red or yellow dot. And what I've found clinically is that with extremely rare exceptions, extremely rare, I have found people who have struggled with chronic issues and chronic weight, all of them, with very rare exception, have variations, red and yellow dots in their vitamin D receptors.
Mhm.
I've found this as a pattern, that the ability to use vitamin D is a commonality amongst people who are struggling with chronic issues.
Why is that so?
Because of that. Vitamin D influences 3 to 5% of your entire human genome, mostly focusing on controlling immunity and inflammation. Yes, there's an influence on bone density, but when you have like 120, like roughly 1/20th to 1/30th of your entire genome is dependent on your ability to use vitamin D, and you can't do it, problems happen.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's huge. Then there's the immunity support genes, looking at things like vitamin C and zinc metabolism. So there's 6 major tests, and at least the analysis that I do. We've covered the Achieve Your Natural Weight, which determines are you an inflammatory water weight gainer, caloric fat gainer, or a toxic hormonal weight gainer. Your ideal diet, are you a keto, Mediterranean, high carb, or paleo? Trigger foods, are you genetically vulnerable to things that help that either change your mood or change your weight? Are you able to use vitamin D correctly? And if not, what we can do to fix that. Immunity genes, like how well you can support your immunity, and then your eating behaviors, which you spent some time on, like how your genes influence your behaviors around your health. And the genetics is ordering genetics for yourself. Doing genetics is for everyone, whether you're chronically ill, feeling normal, or want to be some aspirational biohacker, entrepreneur, life extension enthusiast. Everyone should be looking at their genes. And the good news is that you only need to thoroughly check your genes once, because the genes don't change. They don't change. So check your genes and just get it done. It's worth the investment. It was so worth it for me. Oh my God, it changed my life. My joint pains went away. My digestion and my eating habits completely shifted. My mood changed. Like all of these different things. I have double red dots in vitamin D receptors. No wonder, it was one of the reasons I was so chronically unwell. So I encourage everyone to really get a good genetics analysis, whether you're overweight or not. And if people want to read more, I've got my free ebook. And at the time of this recording, I'm still doing the direct 15-minute consults for qualified participants to see if you're a right candidate for this style of a genetic analysis.
Okay, great. Well, you answered my question, which was, who is the best candidate for doing those tests already? So that's good. And I mean, okay. And so when people get in touch with you and do those tests, I mean, what are different ways that you work with them afterwards?
So the way that we work is it's a package. So people get their genetics, and then they're supported for months after that in order to help them implement these specific lifestyle changes based on their genetics. So it's not just here's your test results, goodbye. It's actually an entire process to make sure that you succeed. Getting the information is not implementation. That's not the same thing. They will have the information, but me and my team also help people implement, because if you implement the genetic based lifestyle changes, these are for life. They're for life. They're not just like, do it for a couple months and hooray. It's, you implement these things for life. So you get support to succeeding for the long term based on your genetic results. So that's like coaching, that's check-ins, it's an online resource portal. It's a tremendous amount of support to help people actually implement their specific gene results.
Okay, and implement that precise profile of lifestyle changes that they need to have.
Yeah, like if they have a keto, if they're genetically a keto and then someone else is genetically high carb, they need a different diet plan.
Mhm.
They need a
Yeah.
different support on that. So that's one example.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, this is so important. I think, again, we should not be tired of repeating that, is that we can get information, but if we don't know how to analyze it, and then if we don't know how to implement it, basically
Mhm.
that information is worthless. So, and
Definitely.
that's why, we overflooded with information about dieting and exercising and, doing those lifestyle changes, but they're not necessarily a good choice for you, right? So
Mhm.
just wanted to reiterate it, repeat that again, because and also I think it helps us to stop the shaming, stop the sort of that feeling of, I'm failing, maybe I'm cheating, maybe I'm not doing enough. It's because you have not had the right guidance.
Absolutely. And with the genes, you've got your template, you've got your Rosetta Stone for long-term health. And genes changed my life, changed the lives of so many of my clients. And I just really encourage people to really take the genetics testing seriously. And you only need to do it once. And you've got the information, and then get support implementing it. And then everything else is so much easier after that.
Amazing. So you can get the free gift from Dr. Shay too. I guess it guides you right into like what it really is all about. Can you say a little bit more about the ebook?
So the ebook is just a bit more in-depth explanation of what the genetics covers, like what is genetics testing, what we covered a chunk of it, but you just get the more detailed version in the ebook. Also, I've got YouTube channel with other interviews. I actually have a video where I go over the ebook in detail, so it's kind of a running narrative as people are reading through it. There's a lot of support there. There's a lot of extra resources.
Okay, great. Yes, so you can access it via the website that we are also going to share, or you can just text Sam, like Dr. Shay's name, to 740-908-8425, and I put that in the comments, and you're going to get that ebook right away. So beautiful. Is there something that you want to leave us with, Dr. Shay, that you want us to take with
Yeah.
us from
So
this interview?
we're at a really amazing point in health technology where we now have the benefits of Western science diagnostics, of all of the machines and the machines that go Bing. If you're a Monty Python enthusiast, you'll know that reference. We have access to all the tools to give us the best information. And we still have all the wisdom of lifestyle and nutrition interventions from that based on hunter-gatherer times, based and including we have them being further validated by other peer-reviewed scientific research done on humans on the value of specific lifestyle, nutrition, diet interventions. We have a wonderful moment in time where we can benefit from both worlds, the Western diagnostics and the natural medicine lifestyle interventions. And genetic testing is that estuary. It's that meeting point between saltwater and freshwater. And this is a wonderful time in history to take advantage of that technology to get the information that you will find useful for literally the rest of your life. It is the single most cost-effective lab test I know because the data doesn't decay over time. I mean, you do adrenal tests, mitochondria tests, gut testing, hormone testing, metals testing, all of those things I also do, but the value of those tests diminishes rapidly after 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
Genetics never goes stale. It is so worth it. Whatever you invest in your genetics, and you should invest in your genetics, just think of, okay, if I amortize this investment over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, how much does it really cost me? The answer is not much, because you're amortizing it over so many years because the value of the data doesn't go bad. So I encourage everyone to really invest in genetics. It will change your life for the long term.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, and remembering that again, like you were talking throughout this interview, is that it's not about finding out about your genetics and then thinking now I am this and I cannot change it. Actually, this is an empowering tool to change what is maybe not functioning in your health.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it switches the perspective as well. So that's very important. Beautiful. Okay, well, it was fascinating. I've learned so much, and I know that everybody who will be watching or watched, is going to, get a tremendous amount of value from this. And so reach out if you have more questions and if you have comments about this interview, and also share with us again what is your struggle and what are you wanting to learn about weight loss and your body in general. So we're here. And thank you again, Dr. Shay. It was a pleasure to host you again. And
Thank
please
you.
be in touch with Dr. Shay, and definitely take advantage of his free gift to start with by texting Sam to 740-908-8425. And I put that in the comments as well. Beautiful. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk soon. Bye
Okay,
bye.
thank you, Monica. Bye.